The wind howled through Dust Mercy like a wounded animal, carrying with it the first snow of an early winter storm. Eli Graves pulled his coat tighter as he led his tired mare down the main street, her hooves clattering against the frozen mud. The year was 1889, and the Wyoming Territory seemed determined to test every soul who dared call it home. The Silver Comet Inn stood like a beacon against the gathering darkness, its windows glowing amber with lamplight. Eli had been riding for 3 days straight, hauling a load of medical supplies from Cheyenne, and both he and his horse needed shelter before the storm truly hit. He pushed through the heavy wooden door, bringing a swirl of snow and cold air with him. The common room fell silent. Every eye turned to study the newcomer, a habit born of survival in a land where strangers could mean trouble or salvation in equal measure. "Close that door before we all freeze," barked Gus Doolin, the proprietor, a thick-set Irishman with arms like ham hocks. His tone softened when he recognized Eli. "Graves didn't expect to see you back so soon. This weather's got everyone scrambling for cover." Eli nodded, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Got caught halfway between here and Rock Creek. My horse won't make it further in this storm." "You're lucky you made it at all," Gus said, wiping down the bar with a grimy cloth. "Stage from Laramie's been stuck since noon. Got folks sleeping in the dining room, the parlor, anywhere there's floor space." "You got a room?" Gus's face twisted into an uncomfortable grimace. "Well now, that's where things get complicated." Before Eli could respond, the door burst open again. A figure stumbled in, completely covered in snow, dragging a heavy saddle. The newcomer was smaller than Eli, bundled in an oversized coat that had seen better days. "Lord have mercy," the figure gasped, voice muffled by a thick scarf. "Thought I'd freeze solid out there." The common room, which had returned to its low murmur of conversation, fell silent once more. This time, the quality of the silence was different, charged with something between pity and revulsion. The newcomer unwound the scarf, revealing the face of a woman. The left side of her face bore old burn scars that ran from her temple down to her jaw. Pulling at the corner of her mouth, her right eye was clear and brown, but the left was partially obscured by the damaged skin. "Miss Pike," Gus said, his voice carefully neutral. "Didn't expect you'd be traveling in this weather." Miriam Pike straightened her shoulders, meeting the stares with practiced indifference. "Had business in Cedar Ridge. Couldn't wait for spring." She hefted her saddle onto the bar. "I need a room for the night, Gus." The innkeeper's grimace deepened. He glanced between Miriam and Eli, then at the crowded common room. "Like I was just telling Graves here, we're in a bit of a situation. Stage got stuck, and we're packed tighter than a pickle barrel." "I can sleep in the stable with my horse," Miriam offered quietly. "Wouldn't be the first time." "No, ma'am. Can't have that. Not in this storm. You'd be frozen by morning." Gus rubbed the back of his neck, clearly wrestling with something. "Thing is, I got one room left. Just one." The implications hung in the air like smoke. Eli saw the way Miriam's jaw tightened, the way her good eye darted toward the door as if calculating whether she could make it to another shelter. "I'll take the stable," Eli said. "Miss Pike can have the room." "Can't do that either," Gus said miserably. "Stable's full of the stage horses plus a dozen others. No room for a man to lay down." He took a deep breath. "You'll have to share. Room's got one bed, but it's sizable. I can bring up extra blankets. Make a pallet on the floor." The common room erupted in whispers. Eli caught fragments. "Forced to share. The ugliest woman in 3 counties. What would the preacher say?" Miriam's face had gone pale beneath the scars. "I'll find somewhere else." "Where?" Gus asked, not unkindly. "Morrison's boarding house is full. So's the widow Henderson's. This storm's got everyone battened down." Eli made a decision. "We're both grown folks in need of shelter. I'll take the floor. Build a proper barrier with blankets. Everything decent and proper." Miriam studied him with her good eye. Eli met her gaze steadily. He'd seen worse things than scars in his years of service, things that marked a soul deeper than any fire could mark skin. "Decent and proper," she repeated softly. Then, louder, "I accept your terms, Mr. Graves." The whispers grew louder. Someone snickered. From a corner table, Preacher Abel Hale rose to his feet, his black coat making him look like a crow among pigeons. "This is highly irregular," he intoned, his voice carrying the weight of imagined moral authority. "A man and woman, unmarried, sharing quarters. What message does this send to our community?" "It sends the message that we don't let folks freeze to death for the sake of appearances," Eli replied evenly. Silas Brand, the largest landowner in 3 counties, stood up beside the preacher. He was a big man, gone to fat, with small, calculating eyes. "The preacher's got a point. What happens in that room tonight could shake the very foundations of our Christian community." "What happens?" Eli said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "Is that 2 travelers get a night's sleep out of the storm. Anyone who thinks different has a mind that needs cleaning." The tension in the room coiled tight as a watch spring. Then Sheriff Cole Avery, who'd been nursing a beer in the corner, spoke up. "Seems to me that what folks do to survive a blizzard is between them and the good Lord. Unless someone's breaking the law, it's no business of mine or anyone else's." Gus seized the moment. "Right then. Room's at the top of the stairs. Second door on the left. I'll send up those extra blankets directly." Eli picked up his saddlebags. Miriam shouldered her saddle with surprising ease for someone of her size. Together, they headed for the stairs, running a gauntlet of stares and whispers. "Forced to share a bed with the ugliest woman in the territory," someone muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "What's this world coming to?" The room was small but clean, with a single bed pushed against one wall and a washstand in the corner. A narrow window looked out onto the swirling snow. Eli immediately began pulling blankets from the bed. "I'll rig a curtain," he said, not looking at her. "Divide the room proper. Floor's mine, bed's yours." Miriam set her saddle carefully in the corner. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." He glanced at her then. "I've slept in worse places. Army teaches you to make do." She studied him while he worked, noting the economical movements, the way he favored his left leg slightly. "Cavalry. 7th Infantry. You know your way around horses, though. That saddle's custom work. I repair them. Saddles, bridles, anything leather." She touched her scarred cheek absently. "Gives me honest work where I don't have to be seen much." Eli strung a rope across the room and hung blankets from it, creating a makeshift wall. There, private as any boarding house. A knock came at the door. Gus entered with an armload of extra blankets and a knowing look. "Folks downstairs are talking up a storm," he warned. "That combination of Hale and Brand means trouble." "Let them talk," Eli said. "It's not just talk I'm worried about." Gus lowered his voice. "Brand's been after the Pike land for months. This gives him ammunition." Miriam's face hardened. "That land's been in my family for 20 years. He's got no claim." "Claims don't always need to be legal to cause problems," Gus said meaningfully. He left, closing the door behind him. They prepared for bed in awkward silence, each staying on their side of the blanket wall. Eli could hear Miriam moving about, the rustle of fabric, the splash of water in the basin. "Mr. Graves," her voice came softly through the barrier. "Yes, Miss Pike. Thank you for speaking up downstairs." "Nothing to thank me for. Common decency shouldn't be remarkable." He heard what might have been a bitter laugh. "You'd be surprised how remarkable it can be." The wind picked up, rattling the window. Somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring, not the regular hourly chime, but a wild, discordant clanging. "That's not right," Miriam said. "Those bells." A orange glow suddenly lit the window. Eli was on his feet in an instant. pushing aside the curtain to look out. Down the street, flames were licking at a building. "Fire!" someone shouted from the street. "Fire at Pike's shop!" Miriam flew to the window. Her leather shop, her livelihood, was ablaze. The flames seemed impossible in the snowstorm, but there they were, hungry and spreading. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No!" She ran for the door. Eli caught her arm. "Wait, this is no accident." Middle of a blizzard. Her good eye was wild with panic. "Everything I have is in that shop." "And whoever said it wants you running out there." But he was already grabbing his coat. "We go together. Stay close." They pounded down the stairs and into the chaos of the common room. Men were organizing a bucket brigade, but the snow and wind made it nearly impossible. Eli noticed Preacher Hale standing well back from the activity, his face serene. Brand was nowhere to be seen. By the time they reached the shop, the fire had consumed the front room. Miriam made a sound like a wounded animal. Years of work, her father's tools, the special treatment she'd developed for waterproofing leather, all of it turning to ash. Sheriff Avery appeared at Eli's elbow. "Found this," he said quietly, showing them a broken bottle that reeked of kerosene. "Thrown through the window. Looks like—" "In the middle of a blizzard," Eli said grimly. "Someone wanted this to happen tonight. While you were forced to share that room," Avery finished. "Creating a scandal to distract from a crime." The church bells continued their chaotic ringing, as if announcing to all of Dust Mercy that something fundamental had changed. The silent judgment of the town had erupted into flame and chaos, and the night was far from over. Miriam stood watching her life's work burn, her scarred face illuminated by the flames. When Eli put a hand on her shoulder, she didn't pull away. "We'll rebuild," he said quietly. "With what?" Her voice was hollow. "That shop was everything. Then we'll find another way." He turned her away from the flames. "But first, we survived tonight, together." As they walked back to the inn through the swirling snow, neither of them noticed the small group of men meeting in the shadows behind the church, or the way Silas Brand smiled as he watched the flames reflected in the windows of the Silver Comet Inn. The storm was just beginning, in more ways than one. The morning after the fire dawned gray and bitter cold. Eli found Miriam standing in the ruins of her shop, sifting through the blackened debris with her bare hands. Her breath clouded in the frigid air as she pulled out a half-melted brass buckle, all that remained of her father's prized saddle. "You'll catch your death out here," Eli said, offering her his gloves. She didn't look up. "Already lost everything else. What's a little frostbite?" "Your hands are your trade. You'll need them when you rebuild." "Rebuild with what?" She finally met his eyes, and he saw the defeat there. "I've got $17 to my name and a piece of land that Silas Brand's been circling like a vulture." As if summoned by his name, Brand appeared at the edge of the ruins, flanked by two of his ranch hands. He wore an expression of exaggerated sympathy that fooled no one. "Miss Pike," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Terrible tragedy. Just terrible." "Save your false sympathy, Brand," Miriam said coldly. Now. No need for hostility. In fact, I'm here to help." He produced a folded paper from his coat. "I'm prepared to make you a generous offer for your land. $300, cash, today." Eli saw Miriam's knuckles whiten. $300 for 20 acres with water rights was robbery. But for someone who'd lost everything, "That land's worth 10 times that," Eli said. Brand's eyes shifted to him, cold as winter slate. "I don't recall asking your opinion." "Graves, this is between Miss Pike and myself." $300, Miriam repeated slowly. "And I suppose you need an answer right now." "Well, the offer won't stand forever. Without your shop, you can't make a living, and there's the matter of your father's debts." "What debts?" Miriam's voice sharpened. Brand smiled. producing another paper. Seems he borrowed against the property back in '82, $500, plus interest. Been accumulating all these years. As the largest creditor in the county, I recently acquired the note. Miriam snatched the paper, scanning it. This isn't my father's signature. Court says different. You can fight it, of course, but lawyers cost money. Brand's smile widened. Or you can take my offer, clear the debt, and have enough left to start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere else? Miriam repeated. How convenient. Sheriff Avery approached, having overheard the conversation. Morning, folks. Brand. That paper been properly witnessed. Everything's legal. Sheriff, you can check the records yourself. Avery studied the document. Witnessed by Preacher Hale and Rafe Cutter. Interesting combination. Respectable men both, Brand said smoothly. Now, Miss Pike, what'll it be? Miriam looked around the ruins, then at Eli, then back at Brand. I need time to think. 24 hours, Brand said. Then I'll have to pursue other legal remedies. He tipped his hat again and walked away, his men trailing behind. When they were gone, Miriam sank onto a charred beam. He's right. I can't fight this without money. That signature's forged, Eli said. Knowing it and proving it are different things. She laughed bitterly. Funny how that fire happened just in time to leave me desperate. They spent the morning salvaging what they could from the ruins. A few tools had survived in a metal strongbox, along with some treated leather pieces, pitiful remnants of a thriving business. As they worked, Eli noticed how efficiently Miriam moved despite her exhaustion, how her hands knew exactly where to search, what might have survived. He found himself studying her when she wasn't looking. Not the scars, but the determined set of her jaw, the way she bit her lip when concentrating. Why are you helping me? She asked suddenly, catching him watching. Someone should. That's not an answer. Eli considered his words. During the war, I saw plenty of folks kicked while they were down, got tired of it, figured I could either become like them or choose different. And you chose different. Most days. They were interrupted by Gus Doolin's arrival with June Harlow, the postmistress, and Esteban Cruz, the town blacksmith. Each carried something: blankets, food, a few coins. It ain't much, Gus said, setting down a basket. But folks wanted to help. Real folks, June added pointedly. Not everyone in this town follows Brand's lead. Esteban, a man of few words, simply handed Miriam a beautifully crafted leather-working knife. Was making for Christmas, you need now. Miriam's eye filled with tears. Thank you, all of you. There's more, June said, glancing around nervously. I overheard something at the post office. Brand and Hale were discussing legal procedures, something about moral turpitude and unfit women holding property. What? Miriam stood abruptly. They're planning to challenge your right to own land based on last night. You and Mr. Graves sharing a room. The group fell silent. In 1889 Wyoming Territory, women had more rights than in most places, but those rights could still be challenged on moral grounds. But nothing happened, Miriam protested. Doesn't matter what happened, Sheriff Avery said, joining them. Matters what people believe, and Brand's been spreading stories all morning. Eli felt a cold anger building in his chest. What kind of stories? The kind that end with Miss Pike being declared an unfit woman and her property reverting to the territory for auction. Avery spat in the dirt. Where Brand will be the only bidder. There has to be something we can do. Gus said. Avery nodded slowly. There is, but Miss Pike might not like it. All eyes turned to the sheriff. He looked uncomfortable but determined. Wyoming law's clear on property rights. A married woman's property is protected from most challenges. Can't be called unfit if she's respectably married. The silence stretched like taffy. Miriam's face had gone pale. "You're suggesting I marry to keep my land. I'm saying it's an option. Maybe the only one that Bran can't fight." Miriam turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. Eli could see her trembling, though whether from cold or emotion he couldn't tell. "I need air," she said, and walked away toward the creek. The others dispersed, leaving Eli alone. He found Miriam sitting on a fallen log by the water, her scarred face turned to the weak winter sun. "Come to convince me to marry someone?" she asked without looking at him. "Come to see if you're all right." "All right," she laughed, short and sharp. "I've lost my shop, my father's tools, everything I've built. Now I'm told the only way to keep my land is to chain myself to some man who'll own me along with it." "Not all marriages are chains," Eli said carefully. "Aren't they? You married Mr. Graves?" "No." "Ever come close?" Eli was quiet for a moment. "Once, she chose someone else while I was at war. Probably for the best." "Why?" "Because I came back different. Saw things, did things. Not sure I'd have been a good husband." Miriam finally looked at him. "You've been nothing but decent to me." "Decency's not enough for marriage." "No," she agreed. "But it's more than most offer." They sat in silence, watching the creek flow around ice-rimmed rocks. Finally, Miriam spoke again. "If I were to marry, and I'm not saying I will, it would have to be a business arrangement. Legal protection only. Separate lives." "Sounds lonely." "I'm already lonely, Mr. Graves. At least this way I keep my land." That evening, back at the Silver Comet, Eli made a decision that surprised even him. He found Miriam in the common room, sitting alone while others gave her a wide berth. "I have a proposition," he said, sitting across from her. She raised an eyebrow, waiting. "You need legal protection. I need, well, I've been drifting since the war. Maybe it's time I stopped. We marry, keep your land safe. I help you rebuild the shop in exchange for room and board. Simple business arrangement." "Why would you do that?" Eli met her gaze steadily. "Because Brand and Hale think they can crush anyone who doesn't fit their mold. Because you deserve better than losing everything to their greed. And because—" He paused, choosing his words. "Because I'm tired of watching from the sidelines while bullies win." Miriam studied him for a long moment. "Separate rooms, no. Expectations." "Separate rooms," Eli confirmed. "Just two people helping each other survive." She extended her hand like a man sealing a business deal. "Then I accept your proposal, Mr. Graves." They shook on it, two scarred souls making a pact against the world. The next morning, they stood before Judge Timothy Randolph at the courthouse. With Gus and June as witnesses, it was a simple ceremony. No flowers or finery. Miriam wore her best dress, saved from the fire because she'd been wearing it to travel, and Eli had brushed his coat as clean as he could manage. "Do you take this woman?" the judge asked. "I do." "Do you take this man?" "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me by Wyoming territory, I pronounce you man and wife." They signed the papers. Legal, binding, protected. Word spread like wildfire. By the time they returned to the Silver Comet, a crowd had gathered. Preacher Hale stood on the inn's porch, face red with manufactured outrage. "This is a mockery," he declared. "A sham marriage to circumvent God's will." "God's will," Miriam stepped forward, newfound steel in her voice. "Or Silas Brand's greed." The crowd murmured. Some nodded agreement. Others looked scandalized. You can't prove anything improper now." Sheriff Avery announced, "They're legally wed. Her property is protected under territorial law." Brand pushed through the crowd, his face mottled with rage. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Eli said quietly. He stood beside Miriam, not touching but present. You'll find another scheme. Brand. But not today. That night, their wedding night, they returned to the same room at the Silver Comet. Eli immediately began stringing up the blanket divide. "You don't have to," Miriam said softly. "We're married now. People can expect whatever they want." He finished hanging the blanket. "Our agreement stands." They prepared for bed with the same careful privacy as before, but when the church bells rang midnight properly this time, 12 measured chimes, something had changed. They were no longer strangers forced together by circumstance. They were allies, bound by law and mutual need. "Eli," Miriam's voice came through the blanket. "Yes." "Thank you. I know this isn't what you planned when you rode into town." "Plans change." He paused. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start rebuilding." Outside, the winter wind howled, but inside their small room, a different kind of warmth began to grow. Not passion, not yet, but something that might, given time, bloom into trust. The silence of Dust Mercy had been shaken, just as the gossips predicted, but not in the way anyone expected. Spring came late to Dust Mercy that year, but when it arrived, it brought hope and hardship in equal measure. The snow melted to reveal not just brown grass, but the full extent of what Miriam had lost. Where her shop once stood, only blackened earth remained. But she and Eli had not been idle, using the salvaged tools and what lumber they could afford. They directed a lean-to workshop against the barn on her property. It wasn't much, canvas walls and a patched roof, but it kept the rain off while she worked. "This design's different," Eli observed, watching her cut leather for a new saddle. They'd been married 2 months now, still keeping to their arrangement of separate quarters and mutual respect. "Lighter weight for the trail drives," Miriam explained, not looking up from her work. "The cowboys complain their backs hurt after weeks in those heavy rigs. This'll help." "Smart." He handed her the awl she was reaching for. They'd developed an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's needs. "Order from the Bar J Ranch came in. 20 bridles by month's end." "I can do that." She paused, considering. "If the leather shipment arrives on time, I'll ride to Laramie tomorrow. Make sure it does." Miriam finally looked up, studying him with that penetrating gaze he'd come to know well. "You don't have to keep doing this. The freight job to Cheyenne pays better than playing assistant to a leather worker." "Made a bargain." Eli said simply, "I keep my bargains." Before she could respond, hoofbeats announced visitors. 3 riders approached, Rafe Cutter and 2 of Brand's other men. Eli's hand moved instinctively toward his rifle, propped nearby. "Easy there. Graves," Cutter said, dismounting with insolent slowness. "Just come to deliver a message." "Deliver it from there," Eli said, not moving his hand from the rifle stock. Cutter grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Mr. Brand wants to remind you folks that water rights need to be actively maintained. Seems your irrigation ditch has some blockage upstream. Real shame if it affected your usage claims." Miriam stood, wiping her hands on her leather apron. "That ditch has run clear for 20 years. Things change." Cutter spat near her feet. "Course, mister. Brand might be willing to help clear it. For the right price." "Get off my land," Miriam said quietly. "Your land for now." Cutter remounted, still grinning. "Amazing how quick fortunes can change out here. Why, just last week, the Hendersons' well went dry. Had to sell to Mr. Brand for pennies on the dollar." After they left, Eli and Miriam rode upstream to investigate. Sure enough, they found the ditch blocked with rocks and timber, clearly placed there deliberately. "We'll need help clearing this," Eli said, surveying the damage. "With what money everything I make goes to supplies and that leather shipment." They worked until sunset, managing to clear only a small portion. As they rode back, exhausted and muddy, they found Sheriff Avery waiting at the house. "Figured you'd had visitors," he said, noting their condition. Cutter's been busy all over the valley. And you can't do anything? Miriam asked. Can't prove he placed those rocks. Could have been natural blockage. Avery's expression said he believed that about as much as they did. But I'm not here about that. Preacher Hale's been stirring up trouble in town, calling your marriage unholy, saying it should be annulled. On what grounds? Eli demanded. Claims it was never consummated. Says he has witnesses who'll testify you still keep separate quarters. Miriam's face flushed. That's nobody's business but ours. I agree. But Hale's got some folks worked up, talking about Christian values and the sanctity of marriage. Avery shifted uncomfortably. Just wanted you to know what's being said. That night, as they ate a simple supper of beans and cornbread, the weight of their situation pressed down like a physical thing. Maybe we should stop this, Miriam said suddenly. You could annul the marriage, go back to your freight work. You didn't sign up for this kind of trouble. Eli set down his spoon. You trying to get rid of me? I'm trying to be fair. This isn't your fight. Became my fight the night they burned your shop while trying to destroy your reputation. He met her eyes. Unless you want me gone. She looked away. No. They finished eating in silence. Later, as Miriam worked on the bridles by lamplight, Eli noticed her favoring her right hand. Let me see, he said. It's nothing. Let me see. Reluctantly, she showed him her palm blistered and raw from the day's work clearing rocks. Sit, he ordered, fetching the medical kit. I can tend myself. I know you can, but you don't have to. He cleaned the blisters with gentle efficiency, the same way he'd tended wounded soldiers. Miriam watched his face as he worked, noting the concentration, the care he took not to cause additional pain. There, he said, wrapping her hand in clean bandages. Should heal in a few days if you keep it clean. Eli, her voice was soft. Why did you really propose this arrangement? He considered the question, still holding her bandaged hand. Truth. That first night, when they were all whispering and staring, you held your head up, didn't bow, didn't break, reminded me of... He paused. During the war, I saw people show their true colors under pressure. Some folded, some turned cruel, but a rare few stood taller. You stood taller. I was terrified, she admitted. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. Means doing what's right despite the fear. Their eyes met and held. Something shifted in the air between them. Subtle but undeniable. Then a rock crashed through the window, shattering the moment along with the glass. Unholy union, someone shouted from outside. More voices joined in, ugly and threatening. Eli grabbed his rifle and moved to the door. Stay inside! Like hell. Miriam picked up the shotgun from beside the fireplace. They stepped onto the porch together. A group of about a dozen men stood in the yard, some carrying torches despite the risk to the dry grass. Preacher Hale stood at their front, Bible raised like a weapon. This abomination ends tonight, he declared. This false marriage mocks the Lord's design. The only thing false here is your piety. Miriam shot back, using God as a cudgel for Bran's greed. Silence, woman. You dare speak of holy things with that marked face, God's punishment is clear upon you. Eli stepped forward, rifle held casually but ready. Preacher, you've got 10 seconds to get off this property, or what you'll shoot a man of God. I'll shoot a trespasser leading a mob. God can sort out the rest. Sheriff Avery rode up then, badge glinting in the torchlight. What's all this? We've come to demand this sham marriage be dissolved. Hale announced. These two live as strangers, not as man and wife. It's an offense to Christian marriage. Avery looked tired. Unless you've been peeking in windows. Preacher, you don't know how they live. And if you have been peeking, that's a crime I can actually arrest you for. Some of the men shifted nervously. The sheriff continued. Now, I suggest you all go home before someone does something they'll regret. Torches and drought grass don't mix well. Gradually, the mob dispersed, though Hale lingered. This isn't over. God's will cannot be thwarted. Neither can the law, Avery reminded him. When they were alone again, Miriam sank onto the porch steps. It's going to get worse, isn't it? Probably, Eli admitted, sitting beside her. But we've got allies too. Gus, June, Esteban, the sheriff. We're not alone. She looked at him sideways. That first night, you slept on the floor to protect my reputation. Now my reputation might get you killed. Still better than the floor, he said, earning a surprised laugh from her. They sat together as the moon rose, neither mentioning that the careful distance they'd maintained had shrunk to mere inches. Inside, the broken window let in the night air, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of more trouble to come. We should board that up, Miriam said eventually. In the morning, tonight, let's just sit. So they did. Two people bound by necessity but growing closer through choice, while the stars wheeled overhead and their enemies plotted in the darkness. The water still needed clearing, the window needed fixing, and their strange marriage needed defending. But for now, they had this, a moment of peace in a world determined to deny them even that small grace. And sometimes, Eli thought, that was enough to build on. Thank you, Miriam said quietly, for standing with me, for all of it. Partners, he reminded her. That's what we agreed. Yes, she said, and her scarred face looked almost beautiful in the moonlight. Partners. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Brand's schemes, Hale's sermons, the town's judgment. But tonight, they had each other's company and the stubborn refusal to be broken. In dust mercy, that qualified as a victory. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as June Harlow hurried across the dusty street toward the Pike Graves homestead. Her normally composed face was flushed with urgency, and she clutched a leather portfolio against her chest like a shield. Miriam looked up from the saddle she was tooling as June's buggy rattled into the yard. June, what's wrong? Where's Eli? June asked, breathless. Went to town for supplies. Should be back soon. Miriam set down her tools, concerned by her friend's agitation. What's happened? June glanced around nervously, then stepped closer. I overheard something at the post office. Brand and Hale were in the back room. They didn't know I was sorting mail in the alcove. They were discussing papers, documents about your father's supposed debt. What about them? Brand said something about making sure the originals stay buried, and Hale replied, just like we did with the Watson claim. June's eyes were wide. Miriam, I think they've done this before, and I think the real documents might still exist somewhere. Miriam's mind raced. The courthouse has copies of all property documents in the archives. No, that's just it. Brand mentioned the courthouse fire of '83. Said it was convenient how it destroyed certain records, but then Hale said something about the church. The church? He said, good thing we have our own insurance policy in the Lord's house. Brand laughed and said something about gold and papers being equally valuable when properly stored. Before Miriam could respond, Eli's wagon appeared on the horizon. He must have sensed trouble because he urged the horses faster, pulling up in a cloud of dust. What's wrong? He asked, taking in their tense faces. June repeated what she'd heard. Eli's expression grew grim. If they're keeping forged documents or stolen gold in the church, he began. It would explain how they've been funding their land grabs. Miriam finished. And why Hale's so desperate to drive us out. We're too close to their operation. That evening, after June had left and darkness had fallen, Eli and Miriam sat at their kitchen table, planning. We can't just break into the church, Miriam said. Even if we found something, it would be our word against theirs, and we'd be the criminals. We need to do this legally. Eli agreed. But we also need to know what we're dealing with. I could scout the building, see if there's any way to... A howl cut through the night, followed by another, then another. The horses in the corral began to whinny nervously. Wolves, Miriam said, standing. They don't usually come this close unless they're desperate. The drought's driven the deer away. Eli grabbed his rifle. We need to check the horses. They moved cautiously into the yard. The moon was new, leaving only starlight to see by. The howling came again, closer this time. There, Eli whispered, pointing to several pairs of glowing eyes at the edge of the property. The wolves were thin, ribs showing even at a distance. Drought had been hard on everyone, predator and prey alike. They're after the chickens, Miriam said. Maybe the foal. They stood together, weapons ready but not aimed. The lead wolf, a massive gray male, stepped into better view. For a long moment, man and beast regarded each other across the darkness. They're just trying to survive, Miriam said softly. Like us. Unlike Brand and his pack, Eli muttered. The wolf pack eventually melted back into the darkness, but Eli and Miriam remained outside, alert to any return. As they kept watch, Miriam finally voiced what had been building between them. This thing with the church, it could be dangerous. More dangerous than anything we've faced so far. I know. I won't think less of you if you walk away. This isn't what you agreed to. Eli turned to look at her in the starlight. When I was in the army, my unit was ordered to burn a Cheyenne village, women and children there. Command said they were harboring hostiles. Miriam waited, sensing the weight of the memory. I refused, took my squad and escorted the villagers to safety instead. Got court-martialed for it. They called it desertion, but I called it keeping my soul. He paused. I've been drifting ever since, trying to figure out where I belong. Maybe I belong here, fighting men like Brand who prey on the defenseless. Is that all? Miriam asked quietly. He met her eyes. No, that's not all. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then Miriam reached out and took his hand, her scarred fingers intertwining with his calloused ones. I'm scared, she admitted. Not of Brand or Hale or even losing the land. I'm scared of hoping for something more than just survival. Hopes, not weakness, Eli said. Sometimes it's the bravest thing there is. They stood hand in hand until dawn painted the eastern sky. Having made a decision without words, whatever came next, they would face it together. Not as a business arrangement, but as something more. The next day, they put their plan into motion, while Miriam worked on orders in town, making herself visible. Eli and Esteban Cruz made their way to the old courthouse record storage, a building that had partially survived the fire of '83. You sure about this? Esteban asked as they pried open a rusted door. Sheriff Avery said anything in here is public record. We're just accessing it outside normal hours. They searched through water-damaged boxes and smoke-blackened ledgers. Hours passed. Then, in a metal box that had protected its contents from the worst of the fire damage, Eli found it. Look at this, land transfer records from 1882. And here, Isaac Pike's signature on a deed verification. Compare it to the supposed loan document. Esteban whistled low. Not even close. A child could see these are different hands. There's more. Look at these transfers. The Watson place, the Hendricks farm, the Chen family's plot all show similar forged documents. All ended up in Brand's hands. They carefully copied the relevant pages, making sure to document everything. As they prepared to leave, Esteban grabbed Eli's arm. Someone's coming! Rafe Cutter and two other men were approaching the building. Eli and Esteban slipped out the back, but not before hearing Cutter say, Brand wants those records destroyed tonight. Make it look like vagrants set a fire. They made it back to the homestead as the sun was setting. Miriam was waiting, relief flooding her face when she saw them. "Did you find anything?" Eli showed her the copied documents. Her expression hardened as she recognized the scope of Brand's crimes. "This is enough to bring him down, but we need the originals, and we need whatever's in that church." "Cutter's planning to burn the record building tonight," Esteban warned. "We're running out of time." As if in response to the urgency, storm clouds began gathering on the horizon, not rain clouds, but the brown wall of an approaching dust storm. "That's a big one," Esteban said. "I better get back to town, board up the smithy." After he left, Eli and Miriam prepared for the storm. As they worked to secure the workshop and stable, Miriam suddenly stopped. "The storm! Everyone will be inside, battened down." Eli caught her meaning immediately, including whoever might be guarding the church. "It's dangerous. Dust storms can kill as easily as bullets. So can leaving Brand in power." They looked at each other, weighing the risks. The wind was already picking up, sending small dust devils dancing across the yard. "Together?" Miriam asked. "Together," Eli confirmed. They prepared carefully wet cloths for breathing, rope to stay connected in the blinding dust, tools for the church locks. As the storm wall approached, turning the afternoon dark as dusk, they set out. The journey to town was nightmarish. The dust was so thick they could barely see their hands in front of their faces. They navigated by memory and instinct, the rope between them the only thing preventing separation. The church loomed out of the dust like a ship in fog. As they'd hoped, it appeared deserted. No one would expect intruders in weather like this. Eli worked on the side door lock while Miriam kept watch. The wind howled around them, carrying debris that struck like small hammers. Finally, the lock gave way. Inside, the sudden quiet was almost shocking. Dust filtered through cracks, dancing in the dim light from the windows. They moved quickly to the vestry, where Hale kept his office. "Check the floorboards," Miriam whispered. "If they're hiding something substantial." They found it under a loose board beneath Hale's desk, a heavy metal strongbox. Eli picked the lock with skills learned in less noble times. Inside were stacks of gold coins, property deeds, and most damning, a ledger detailing the conspiracy. Names, dates, amounts paid for forgeries, property stolen. "My God," Miriam breathed. "They've been doing this for years." "Look at this," Eli said, finding a particular entry. "Your father didn't borrow money. He loaned it to the church for the bell tower. Brand and Hale changed the loan direction in their forgery." They heard voices outside, barely audible over the storm, moving quickly. They copied crucial pages from the ledger, then carefully replaced everything. They slipped out moments before Hale and several men entered the church, probably seeking shelter from the storm. The journey back was even worse than the trip out. The dust storm had reached its full fury. They stumbled into their house, coughing and gasping, covered in dirt. As they cleaned up and compared notes, the full scope of what they'd discovered became clear. "We have enough to destroy them," Miriam said, "but we need to be smart about how we use it." The Founders' Day celebration. Eli suggested, 3 days from now, the whole town will be there, including the circuit judge who comes for the occasion. And if we present the evidence publicly, in front of everyone, they can't make it disappear, or us. Outside, the dust storm continued to rage, but inside their small home, hope burned brighter than it had in months. They had the truth. Now they just had to survive long enough to reveal it. "Eli," Miriam said as they prepared for bed, still in separate rooms. But the distance felt different now. "Yeah. After this is over, after we've exposed them, what then will you stay?" He paused in the doorway between their rooms. "Do you want me to?" "Yes," she said simply. "I do. Then I'll stay, as long as you'll have me." The storm rattled the windows, but inside, something warm and precious began to grow between them. Not a marriage of convenience anymore, but the beginning of a true partnership built on trust, respect, and the growing certainty that they were stronger together than apart. The morning of Founders' Day dawned clear and hot. The dust storm had passed, leaving the town covered in a fine layer of grit that sparkled in the early sunlight. Eli stood on the porch, watching Miriam adjust the documents hidden inside her leather satchel for the 10th time. "They're still there," he said gently. "They haven't vanished since you checked 5 minutes ago." She looked up, attempting a smile. "I keep thinking we're missing something. That brand will find a way to slither out of this." "Not this time." Eli checked his pistol, a precaution they'd both agreed on. Too many witnesses, too much evidence. But their confidence was shaken when Gus Doolin arrived, his face grim. "You folks might want to reconsider your plans." "What's happened?" Miriam asked. "Rafe Cutter's been spreading poison all morning. Says you used feminine wiles to bewitch Eli into marriage. Claims he's seen you practicing unholy rituals at night, that your scars are the devil's mark." Miriam's hand went unconsciously to her face. "People don't believe that garbage." "Some do. Enough to make trouble." Gus hesitated. "There's worse. He's saying Eli only married you to steal your land, that he's planning to have you declared incompetent and take everything." Eli's jaw tightened. "Let me guess. Brand's behind this slander." "Who else he's setting the stage, trying to discredit you both before you can act." Gus looked between them. "Maybe you should wait. Find another way." "No," Miriam said firmly. "We've waited long enough, hidden long enough. Today, we stand in the light." They prepared carefully, knowing the danger. Miriam wore her best dress, a deep blue that her mother had made years ago. Eli put on his former uniform jacket, the one he'd kept despite everything. If Brand wanted to question their character, let him face a veteran and a survivor. The town square was already filling when they arrived. Banners flew. Children ran between the vendor stalls, and the smell of roasting meat filled the air. It should have been festive. But Eli noticed the looks, the whispers, the way people stepped aside as they passed. Sheriff Avery found them near the speaker's platform. "Judge Morrison's here, set up in the town hall for any official business." He lowered his voice. "Whatever you're planning, be careful. Brand's got men positioned all around." They could see them, Cutter lounging against a post, 2 others by the well. More scattered through the crowd, all watching, waiting. "Like wolves," Miriam murmured. "Except wolves are honest about what they are," Eli replied. The ceremony began with Mayor Tompkins giving his usual bloated speech about civic virtue and prosperity. Preacher Hale followed with a sermon about righteousness that seemed aimed directly at Miriam and Eli. Then, during the pause before the next speaker, Miriam stepped forward. "I'd like to address the town," she said, her voice carrying clearly. Mayor Tompkins blustered. "This isn't the time." "When is the time?" "Mayor." She climbed onto the platform despite his protests. "When my home burns, when my land is stolen, when good people are driven out by lies and greed." The crowd stirred, some moving closer, others backing away. Brand pushed through from the back, his face darkening. "Someone remove this woman," he commanded. "She's clearly hysterical." "I'm not hysterical," Miriam said calmly. "I'm angry. There's a difference." She pulled out the copied documents. "These are records from the courthouse archives, records someone tried to destroy last night." "Lies," Hale shouted. "This woman consorts with darkness. The only darkness here is in your ledger. Preacher." Eli had climbed up beside Miriam. "The one you keep under your floorboards. The one detailing years of forged documents and stolen land." The crowd's murmur grew to a roar. Judge Morrison, a stern man with silver hair, stood from his chair. "These are serious accusations." "We have proof," Miriam said, handing him the documents. "Compare these signatures. Look at the pattern of land transfers. Every family that stood against Brand ended up losing their property through sudden deaths or mysterious documents.
"She's a liar!"
Cutter shouted, pushing forward. "A scarred witch who bewitched a good man." "Enough." Eli's voice cut through like a blade. "You want to talk about character? I served 8 years defending this country. Miriam Pike saved 3 children from a burning barn. Earning those scars, you mock. What have you done except terrorize families and burn property on Brand's orders?" "You can't prove I burned anything," Cutter snarled. "Actually, we can." June Harlow stepped out of the crowd, holding up a charred bottle. "I found this near the Pike shop the night of the fire. Still smells of kerosene. And I saw you buying kerosene that very afternoon. Mr. Cutter." More voices joined in. Esteban Cruz testified about the threats to his family. The widow Chen, through her son translating, told of documents appearing that she'd never signed. One by one, Brand's victims found courage in numbers. Brand himself had gone pale, but he rallied. "These are baseless accusations from dissatisfied people who made poor business decisions." "Is this baseless?" Sheriff Avery stepped forward with the strongbox from the church. "Judge Morrison gave me a warrant to search the church based on credible evidence." "Preacher Hale, you want to explain why you have property deeds and gold coins hidden under your floor?" Hale's face went from red to white. That's church property." "Really?" Avery opened the box, pulling out documents. "Because these deeds have other people's names on them, and this ledger details what looks like a criminal conspiracy." The crowd pressed closer, anger replacing fear. Someone shouted, "Thieves!" Another voice, "Land stealers!" Brand made a desperate move. He grabbed for Miriam, perhaps thinking a hostage would save him, but she'd survived too much to be easy prey. She twisted away, and Eli was there, placing himself between them. "Touch her and it'll be the last thing you do," he said quietly. Brand pulled a derringer from his vest. "Get back, all of you." The crowd scattered. Eli pushed Miriam behind him, his hand on his pistol but not drawing. "Think about this, Brand. You shoot anyone here in front of all these witnesses. There's no walking away." "I've walked away from plenty." Brand sneered, but his hands shook. "Not anymore," Judge Morrison said firmly. "Mr. Brand, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and now threatening violence. Sheriff, do your duty." Avery moved forward, but Cutter interfered, going for his gun. Eli was faster, his weapon clearing leather and firing in one smooth motion. Cutter's gun flew from his hand as he clutched his wounded arm. In the chaos, Brand tried to run, but the crowd had turned. The people he'd terrorized for years closed in, not violent but implacable. He found himself surrounded, forced back toward the sheriff. "It's over. Silas," Avery said, producing shackles. "Time to pay for what you've done." As Brand and Cutter were led away, Hale fell to his knees, babbling about temptation and forgiveness. The crowd had no sympathy for him either. Judge Morrison raised his hands for quiet. "Based on the evidence presented, I'm ordering an immediate review of all property transfers in the past decade. Any transaction involving Mr. Brand or authenticated by Preacher Hale will be investigated." A cheer went up. People who'd lost everything suddenly had hope again. In the midst of the celebration, Miriam found herself overwhelmed. She slipped away to the quiet area behind the platform, needing a moment to breathe. Eli found her there, tears streaming down her face. "Hey," he said softly. "We did it. We won." "I know. It's just—" She wiped her eyes. "All these years of being afraid, of hiding, of accepting their judgment, and now you're free." She looked at him then, really looked at him. This man who'd stood by her, fought for her, never once flinching from her scars or her struggles. "Eli, I need to tell you something." He waited, patient as always. "That first night, when they forced us to share a room, I was terrified, not of you, but of hope, of thinking maybe someone could see past." She touched her scarred cheek. Pass this. See me. I do see you, he said simply. Have from the start. I love you, she said, the words coming in a rush. Not because you helped me save my land or fought Brand. I love you because you hung that blanket to protect my dignity, because you bandaged my hands, because you treat me like I'm worth something. Eli cupped her face gently, thumb tracing the edge of her scars. You are worth everything, and I love you too, not despite anything, but because of everything. Your strength, your kindness, your refusal to break. They kissed then, soft and sweet, a promise of all the tomorrows they'd build together. When they returned to the celebration, hand in hand, the crowd cheered again, but this time it wasn't for justice or vindication. It was for love, real love, hard-won and true. That night, back in their home, they stood at the bedroom door. The blanket that had divided the room was gone, folded away. Are you sure? Eli asked. I'm sure, Miriam said. No more walls between us. They entered together, equals in every way. Their marriage no longer a legal convenience, but a true union of hearts and souls. Outside, the stars shone clear and bright over Dust Mercy. The town had been shaken from its silence. Truth had conquered lies, and two scarred souls had found in each other the healing they'd never thought possible. Tomorrow would bring challenges, the legal proceedings, rebuilding trust in the community, establishing their life together. But tonight, they had each other, and that was more than enough. No more hiding, Miriam whispered in the darkness. No more hiding, Eli agreed, holding her close. And in a town that had thrived on secrets and silence, their love became a beacon of what was possible when people chose courage over fear, truth over comfort, and love over all. The evening air in the town square crackled with tension thicker than the dust that perpetually coated Dust Mercy. Lanterns had been strung between posts, casting dancing shadows across the faces of nearly every soul in town. They'd gathered for what Mayor Tompkins had reluctantly agreed to call a public hearing on property rights and civil order. Judge Morrison sat behind a makeshift judicial bench, 3 planks laid across 2 barrels, his expression grave. To his left sat the evidence, the strongbox from the church, stacks of documents, and the ledger that detailed years of conspiracy. To his right stood Sheriff Avery, hand resting on his pistol, scanning the crowd for trouble. Miriam and Eli sat in the front row, surrounded by allies but acutely aware of hostile stares from Brand's remaining supporters. The man himself sat shackled but unbroken, his expensive suit dusty but his arrogance intact. Beside him, Preacher Hale seemed to have aged a decade in 3 days, his hollow eyes darting between the crowd and the heavens as if seeking divine intervention. This hearing will proceed with order, Judge Morrison announced, gaveling with a hammer borrowed from Esteban's smithy. We're here to examine evidence of systematic fraud and determine the scope of criminal conspiracy in this community. Brand's lawyer, a nervous man from Cheyenne named Cornelius Watts, stood. Your Honor, my client contests all charges and demands. Your client, the judge interrupted, will have his chance to speak. First, we'll hear the evidence. Sheriff Avery presented the physical evidence methodically. The forged documents, the hidden gold, the ledger with its damning entries. As each piece was revealed, the crowd's murmurs grew louder. Now, Judge Morrison said, we'll hear from the victims, Mrs. Pikegraves. Please take the stand. Miriam rose, smoothing her dress. She'd chosen to wear blue again, the color of clear skies and hope. As she passed Brand, he hissed, You'll regret this, Scarface. Eli started to rise, but Miriam placed a hand on his shoulder. She didn't need defending. Not anymore. State your name for the record. The judge instructed, Miriam Pikegraves. Her voice carried clear and strong. Tell us about the night your shop burned. Miriam recounted the events, the forced room sharing that started it all, the conveniently timed fire, Brand's arrival with forged documents. As she spoke, her voice gained strength, and the crowd leaned in. Hearing, perhaps for the first time, the full truth of what had been done to her. He offered me $300 for land worth 10 times that. She continued. When I refused, the threats escalated. Cut fences, blocked water, constant harassment. Lies, Brand burst out. That woman is... The sound of Judge Morrison's improvised gavel was like a gunshot. Mr. Brand, you'll remain silent or be removed from these proceedings. One by one, others testified. The widow Chen, through her son's translation, told of documents she couldn't read being used to steal her farm. Tom Henderson described wells mysteriously going dry until he sold to Brand. June Harlow detailed the conversations she'd overheard, dates and names corroborating the ledger's entries. Then Eli took the stand. His testimony was brief but devastating, focusing on the pattern of intimidation and the military precision of Brand's operations. In the Army, we'd call this a campaign, he said. Systematic, coordinated, designed to break the enemy's will to fight. And the enemy in this case, Judge Morrison asked. Anyone who had something Brand wanted. Finally, it was Brand's turn. He took the stand with theatrical indignation, but his performance quickly unraveled. These people are jealous of my success, he claimed. They made poor decisions and now seek to blame. Mr. Brand, the judge interrupted. How do you explain your signature on this ledger? I've never seen that book. Strange, since your handwriting appears throughout, including this entry about removing the pike obstacle. The crowd stirred. Someone shouted, "Murder!" I meant business obstacle, Brand protested, sweating now. And this entry about holy insurance hidden in the church. Brand's eyes darted to Hale, who seemed to shrink into himself. Mr. Hale, the judge continued. Would you care to explain your role? The preacher stood on shaking legs. I was led astray. The devil works through... The devil! Esteban Cruz stood in the crowd, his voice cutting. Was it the devil who took my cousin's farm, who preached that her sick child was God's punishment for not selling to Brand? Others joined in, voices rising with years of suppressed anger. Judge Morrison had to gavel repeatedly for order. As the crowd settled, Brand made his move. Whether from desperation or calculation, he suddenly lunged at Miriam, perhaps thinking that chaos would save him. But she was ready this time. As he reached for her, she grabbed the leather satchel at her feet and swung it hard, catching him across the face. The heavy documents inside made it an effective weapon. Brand staggered back, nose bleeding, directly into Sheriff Avery's restraining grip. Assault Watts, the lawyer, cried. She assaulted my client. Self-defense, Judge Morrison ruled dryly. I saw Mr. Brand lunge at her, though I must say, Mrs. Graves. That was an impressive swing. I work with my hands, Your Honor. Miriam replied calmly. They're stronger than they look. A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd. Even some of Brand's former supporters couldn't suppress smiles. But the moment of levity was shattered by the sound of church bells, not the regular tolling, but the same wild clanging that had announced the fire months ago. Everyone turned toward the church, where smoke was beginning to rise from the bell tower. He's burning the evidence, someone shouted. Indeed, Rafe Cutter, who'd slipped away during the testimony, could be seen fleeing from the church's side door. Stop him, Judge Morrison commanded. But Eli was already moving. His army training showed as he sprinted across the square, cutting off Cutter's escape route. The hired gun reached for his weapon with his uninjured arm, but Eli was faster, tackling him to the ground. Meanwhile, the crowd mobilized to fight the fire. Buckets appeared as if by magic, a human chain forming from the well to the church. But when Esteban and several men broke down the door, They found the fire was limited to a pile of documents in the vestry Hale's private records. It seemed, "Let it burn," someone suggested. But Judge Morrison intervened. "Save what you can. Even partial documents may help victims reclaim their property." As the fire was controlled and Cutter was dragged back in chains, Judge Morrison gavelled the crowd to order once more. "I've heard enough," he announced. "Silas Brand, you are bound over for trial on charges of fraud, conspiracy, extortion, and attempted assault. Abel Hale, you face charges of fraud and conspiracy. Rafe Cutter, add arson to your previous charges." The crowd erupted in cheers, but the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'm appointing a special commissioner to review all property transfers in this county for the past 15 years. Any transaction involving these men will be investigated, and where fraud is proven, property will be restored to rightful owners." More cheers, mixed with tears from those who'd thought their land lost forever. "This town," the judge continued, his voice rising over the noise, "has been held hostage by greed disguised as respectability. Let this be a lesson. Evil flourishes when good people remain silent. But tonight, silence has been broken." As Brand, Hale, and Cutter were led away, the atmosphere shifted from tension to celebration. Music started up, a fiddle joined by a guitar. People who'd avoided each other's eyes for years suddenly embraced. Miriam stood in the middle of it all, looking dazed. Eli wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You all right?" "It's really over, isn't it?" "This part is building something new. That's just beginning." June Harlow approached, tears streaming down her face. "Miriam, I'm so sorry. All these years, I knew something was wrong, but I was too scared." "You spoke up when it mattered," Miriam interrupted, embracing her friend. "That's what counts." As the evening wore on, the impromptu celebration grew. Tables were dragged out. Food appeared, and the town square transformed into something Dust Mercy hadn't seen in years, a true community gathering. Sheriff Avery found Miriam and Eli dancing slowly to a waltz, oblivious to the activity around them. "Wanted to thank you both," he said. "I've been sheriff here 5 years, always sensing something rotten but never able to prove it. You gave me the tools to do my job." "Just wanted our freedom," Miriam replied. "Sometimes that's the most revolutionary act of all," Avery said, moving on. As midnight approached, church bells rang again, properly this time. 12 measured chimes. The sound that had once announced disaster now marked a new beginning. "Shall we go home?" Eli asked. "Home," Miriam repeated, savoring the word. "Yes." They walked through the celebrating crowd, accepting congratulations and promises of help rebuilding. At the edge of the square, Miriam turned for one last look. "My father would have been proud," she said softly. "He raised a fighter. He'd have expected nothing less." As they climbed into their wagon, Gus Doolin called out, "Hey, when are you two having a proper wedding? The real kind, with flowers and such." Miriam and Eli exchanged glances, then smiled. "Soon," Eli called back. "When the dust settles." "In Dust Mercy," Gus laughed. "You'll be waiting forever." But as they drove home under stars that seemed especially bright, both knew that wasn't true. The dust would settle, the town would heal, and they would build a life together on foundations of truth and justice rather than fear and lies. "No more secrets," Miriam murmured, leaning against Eli's shoulder. "No more silence," he agreed. Behind them, the celebration continued. Voices raised in song and laughter. The sound carried across the prairie, announcing to the world that Dust Mercy had finally lived up to its name, showing mercy to those who'd suffered, and bringing justice to those who'd caused the suffering. The real wedding night, the one built on choice rather than necessity, love rather than convenience, was still to come. But tonight had been its own kind of consummation, the marriage of truth and justice. witnessed by an entire town ready to start anew. 3 weeks after the dramatic trial, Dust Mercy buzzed with activity unlike anything seen in years. Where Miriam's burned shop once stood, a new structure was rising from the ashes, quite literally. The townspeople had rallied, bringing lumber, nails, and willing hands to rebuild what greed had destroyed. Eli stood on the roof beam, hammering shingles into place, while below, Miriam directed the installation of her new workshop equipment. Some had been salvaged, some donated, and some purchased with the restitution money Judge Morrison had ordered Brand to pay from his seized assets. "Careful up there," Miriam called. "I just got you trained proper. Can't afford to break in a new husband." The men working nearby chuckled. The ease between the Graves couple had become a source of town pride rather than gossip. "More worried about the husband than the roof," Esteban teased from where he was installing new metalwork. "Roof can be replaced," Miriam shot back, earning more laughter. The transformation wasn't limited to the shop. All across Dust Mercy, changes were taking root. The Hendersons had returned to their farm. Their well mysteriously undried once Brand's men weren't around to divert the water. The widow Chen's son had opened a restaurant in what was once Brand's office building. Even the church had changed. A new preacher, Reverend Marcus Ellis, had arrived from Denver, a quiet man who preached more about kindness than brimstone. "Mrs. Graves," a young voice piped up. Beth Morrison, the judge's granddaughter, ran up clutching a piece of leather. "Look, I did the stitching just like you showed me." Miriam examined the girl's work with serious attention. "Very good. Beth, see how even your stitches are getting. You'll make a fine leather worker." The girl beamed and ran off to show her friends. Teaching the children had been Miriam's idea, passing on skills and confidence in equal measure. The workshop hosted classes 3 afternoons a week now, filled with eager young hands learning a trade. Sheriff Avery approached, tipping his hat. "Afternoon. Folks, thought you'd want to know. Got word from the territorial prison. Hale's been assigned to the library. Seems fitting, him handling books honestly for once." "And Brand?" Eli asked. "Climbing down from the roof?" "Breaking rocks in the quarry. Judge gave him 15 years, though he'll probably serve 10 with good behavior." "Good behavior and Silas Brand," Miriam mused. "There's 2 things that don't go together." Avery chuckled. "True enough. Oh, and June wanted me to remind you about the town meeting tonight. They're voting on the new waterworks proposal." After the sheriff left, Miriam and Eli took a break, sharing water from a canteen and surveying their progress. The shop was nearly complete, larger than before, with better ventilation and a separate room for teaching. "Never thought I'd see this," Miriam said softly. "The town actually working together." "Crisis has a way of showing people what really matters," Eli replied. "Plus, you gave them something to believe in. Standing up to Brand showed everyone it was possible." "We stood up to him," she corrected. "I couldn't have done it alone." They were interrupted by a commotion down the street. A fancy carriage had arrived, unusual for Dust Mercy. From it stepped a well-dressed woman with shrewd eyes and an air of authority. "That's Eleanor Brand," someone whispered. "Silas's sister from San Francisco." The crowd parted as she approached the workshop. Miriam and Eli tensed, ready for trouble. "Mrs. Graves." Eleanor Brand's voice was cultured, nothing like her brother's rough tones. "I'm here to discuss a business proposition." "If you're here to cause trouble," Eli began. "Quite the contrary." Eleanor smiled thinly. "I'm here to clean up my family's mess. My brother's actions have shamed the Brand name across 3 states. I intend to make amends." She produced a leather portfolio. "I've been reviewing Silas's assets. Beyond the criminal restitution, there's substantial property and capital. I propose to establish a fund administered by the town council to provide low-interest loans for small businesses and farms." Miriam studied the woman carefully. "What's your angle?" Redemption, Mrs. Graves. The brand name meant something once. My grandfather built his fortune honestly. I'd like it to mean something good again. She paused. And frankly, investing in this town's recovery is good business. Prosperous communities benefit everyone. After Eleanor Brand left, having donated a substantial sum to the workshop's teaching program, the work resumed with renewed energy. By late afternoon, the shop was essentially complete. The workers stood back to admire their handiwork. "Needs a sign," Gus Doolin declared. Miriam unveiled what she'd been working on, a carved wooden sign reading, "Pike Graves Leatherworks and School." "School?" Eli asked. Surprised. "Why not? We're teaching skills, offering apprenticeships. Might as well make it official." She grinned. "Besides, I've got plans. There's a whole generation of young people in this town who need options beyond working for the next Silas Brand who comes along." That evening's town meeting was held in the rebuilt community hall. The waterworks proposal passed unanimously, a system of shared wells and irrigation channels that would prevent anyone from controlling the town's water supply again. But the real surprise came when Mayor Tompkins announced his resignation. "I've been mayor for 8 years," he said, looking older than his years. "And for too many of those, I let fear guide my decisions. This town needs fresh leadership." "Who'll run things?" someone called out. "That's for you all to decide, but I'd like to nominate someone for consideration." He turned to the crowd. Miriam Graves. The hall erupted in discussion. Miriam looked stunned. "I'm not a politician," she protested. "Exactly why you'd be good at it," June Harlow countered. "You've already shown more leadership than we've had in years." "I run a leather shop and teach school," Beth Morrison piped up, "and helped save everyone's farms and stood up to the bad men." The child's simple summary seemed to crystallize the moment. When the vote was called, it was overwhelming. Miriam Graves would be Dust Mercy's first female mayor. Later that night, as they lay in bed together, no more walls between them, Miriam was still processing the day's events. "Mayor," she said, testing the word. "Mayor Miriam Graves. Sounds strange." "Sounds right to me," Eli said, pulling her closer. "Though you know this means more work, more responsibilities. We've got a good town council now, and Sheriff Avery's solid. Besides," she turned to face him in the darkness, "I've got a partner. We're in this together. Right?" "Always," he confirmed, kissing her forehead, then her nose, then her lips. "Eli," she said after a while, "do you ever think about what would have happened if that blizzard hadn't forced us together that first night?" He considered. "I'd probably still be drifting. You'd still be fighting alone. The town would still be under Brand's thumb. So maybe it wasn't such a curse after all, being forced to share that room." "Best thing that ever happened to me," he said firmly, "even if the path here was hard." "The best things usually are," she agreed. Outside their window, Dust Mercy slept peacefully. No mysterious fires, no threatening mobs, no church bells ringing warnings. Just a town healing, growing, becoming what it should have been all along. In the workshop, leather goods waited for morning's work. In the courthouse, deeds were being reviewed and corrected. In homes across town, families slept secure in the knowledge that their property and rights were protected. And in the house on Pike Land, now truly Pike Graves land, two people who'd been thrown together by circumstance and forged into something stronger by trial held each other close, planning a future that neither could have imagined that snowy night at the Silver Comet Inn. "I love you," Miriam whispered into the darkness. "Love you too, Madam Mayor," Eli replied, earning himself an elbow in the ribs and a laugh that was worth any amount of teasing. The silence that had once oppressed Dust Mercy was truly broken now, replaced by the sounds of life, growth, and hope. Children learned trades. Farmers shared water. Businesses thrived. And at the center of it all, A scarred woman and a drifting soldier had found in each other and their community something worth fighting for, worth building, worth keeping. Justice had been served. The town was rebuilding, and tomorrow promised to be better than yesterday. The most revolutionary idea of all in a place that had been frozen in fear for so long. The transformation of Dust Mercy was complete, and its future, like the clear Wyoming sky, seemed limitless with possibility. The morning sun broke over the mountains, painting the grasslands in shades of gold and amber. It was the kind of dawn that made the Wyoming territory look like paradise rather than the harsh frontier it could be. Miriam stood at the edge of their property, breathing in the sage-scented air, watching the water flow through the irrigation channels that now served the entire valley fairly. "You're up early," Eli said, joining her with 2 cups of coffee.
Couldn't sleep. Too excited, I guess.
She accepted the cup gratefully.
Is it foolish to have a wedding ceremony now we've been married over a year?
"Nothing foolish about celebrating what we've built," he replied. "The first time was about survival. This time is about choice." She leaned into him, remembering that desperate night at the courthouse, the hasty vows spoken for protection rather than passion. Today would be different. Today, the whole town would witness their commitment, not as a legal maneuver, but as a declaration of love. "Besides," Eli added with a grin, "June would never forgive us if we denied her the chance to organize a proper wedding. She's been planning this for months." Indeed, June Harlow had thrown herself into the preparations with enthusiasm that bordered on military precision. The meadow behind the church, the new church, built where the old one stood, had been transformed with wildflowers and white muslin. Tables groaned under the weight of food donated by grateful families whose lands had been restored. By noon, it seemed all of Dust Mercy had gathered. The Hendersons, back on their farm and prospering. The Chen family, their restaurant now a cornerstone of Main Street. Esteban Cruz, wearing his finest shirt, tuning his guitar for the celebration. Even Eleanor Brand had returned from San Francisco, her presence a reminder of how much had changed. Sheriff Avery, who'd agreed to give Miriam away in place of her late father, found her in the workshop, making last-minute adjustments to her dress, her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered and restored. "Nervous?" he asked.
No, she said, then laughed. Yes, but good nervous. Like the night we exposed Brand, but happier.
"You've earned happy," Avery said gently. "Both of you have. This town owes you more than it can ever repay." "The town doesn't owe us anything. We're all in this together." She stood, smoothing the cream-colored fabric. "How do I look?" "Like a woman who fought for her place in this world and won," he said simply. The ceremony itself was held where the old water channels met the new ones, a symbol, Reverend Ellis had suggested, of streams joining to become a river. Eli waited there in his best suit, the one he'd bought with his first earnings from their thriving business. When he saw Miriam approaching, his face lit up with such pure joy that several of the watching women dabbed at their eyes. She walked through the gathered crowd with her head high, no veil to hide behind. Her scars were part of her story, and she wore them without shame. Children she'd taught waved excitedly. Women who'd found courage in her example smiled with pride. Men who'd once whispered about the ugliest woman in the territory now saw only strength and grace. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Ellis began, his voice carrying across the meadow, "we gather today not to create a union, but to celebrate one already forged in trials and triumphs. Eli and Miriam have asked to speak their own vows, words from their hearts rather than from any book." Eli took Miriam's hands in his. "Miriam Pike Graves, when I rode into Dust Mercy, I was a man running from his past, believing I deserved nothing good. You showed me that redemption isn't about what we deserve. It's about what we choose to build. I chose you then, and I choose you now, and I'll choose you every day until the mountains crumble and the rivers run dry." Miriam's voice was steady, though tears tracked down her cheeks. Eli Graves, you saw past these scars to the woman beneath before I even knew she existed. You stood beside me when the whole world seemed against us. You gave me courage when I had none and strength when mine failed. I loved you before I had words for it, and I'll love you long after words fail me. The rings, Reverend Ellis asked. Beth Morrison stepped forward, proudly carrying the cushion with 2 simple gold bands, made by Esteban from gold recovered from Bran's hoard, purified and reformed into something honest. As they exchanged rings, a murmur ran through the crowd. Riders were approaching, a lot of them. For a moment, old fears surfaced, but then someone recognized the lead rider.
It's the governor,
Mayor Tompkins, now head of the water board, exclaimed. Governor Warren himself. Indeed, Francis E. Warren, Wyoming's last territorial governor before statehood, dismounted with obvious pleasure. I hope we're not too late for the ceremony. Just in time for the celebration, Governor, Miriam said, after Eli had kissed her to thunderous applause. What brings you to Dust Mercy? You do. Mayor Graves, both of you. Word of what happened here has spread across the territory. A town that cleaned out corruption, rebuilt itself on principles of justice and community. That's the kind of story Wyoming needs as we move towards statehood. He smiled. Plus, I have a wedding gift. The territorial legislature has approved funding for a proper schoolhouse here, based on the success of your leatherworking program. The celebration that followed was one for the history books. Music filled the air. Esteban's guitar joined by fiddles and a harmonica. Dancing went on until the stars came out. Stories were shared of the bad old days and hopes for the future. As the evening wound down, Miriam and Eli found themselves by the same creek where they'd once sat as wary strangers negotiating a business arrangement. No regrets, she asked, echoing his question from long ago. Only one, he said, that it took a blizzard and a burned shop and a corrupt land grab to bring us together. Imagine if we'd met under normal circumstances. We might have passed right by each other, Miriam pointed out. You'd have seen my scars and looked away. I'd have seen a drifter and kept my distance. So maybe Sheriff Avery was right that first night. What we do to survive shapes who we become. He pulled her close. And who we become shapes who we can love. They stood together, watching the water flow. In the distance, the church bell rang, not in alarm, but in celebration. The sound carried across the valley, no longer a warning but a welcome. Look, Miriam said, pointing to the horizon. The Evans family. They're bringing in a wagon train of settlers. New families looking for a fresh start. They'll find it here, Eli said with certainty. Dust Mercy's a place where people can build something real now. As they walked back to the celebration, hand in hand, children ran past playing tag, their laughter bright in the evening air. The adults gathered in groups, discussing plans for the new school, the expanded water system, the fall harvest. The town that had once whispered in judgment now spoke openly of hopes and dreams. Hey, Mrs. Graves, Mr. Graves. Beth Morrison ran up, breathless with excitement. Ma says to tell you the photographer from Cheyenne is here. He wants to take a picture of the whole town. And you two in the center, since you're the reason we're all here celebrating. They joined the gathering, taking their place among friends and neighbors. As the photographer prepared his equipment, Miriam looked around at the faces surrounding them, where once she'd seen suspicion and cruelty. Now she saw community and acceptance. Ready? The photographer called out. Everyone stay very still. In that moment, captured forever on glass and silver, stood the rebirth of Dust Mercy. At its heart were two people who'd been forced together by a blizzard and the schemes of evil men, who'd found in each other not just protection but partnership, not just survival but love. The flash powder exploded in a burst of light, and when their vision cleared, the stars were fully out. The celebration continued, But Eli and Miriam slipped away to their wagon, decorated with ribbons and flowers by the town's children. As they drove home, to their real home, built on love and trust rather than necessity and fear, Miriam rested her head on Eli's shoulder. "That first night at the Silver Comet," she mused, "when they forced us to share that room, the night that shook the town's silence." Eli finished. "It really did, didn't it? One room, one choice to treat each other with dignity, and everything changed. The best disasters often lead to the greatest blessings," he said, guiding the horses along the familiar path. Behind them, the lights of Dust Mercy twinkled like earthbound stars. Ahead, their home waited, no longer divided by blankets and fear, but united in purpose and love. The water in the channels caught moonlight as it flowed, a silver ribbon binding the community together. And in the heart of the Wyoming Territory, a town that had once embodied the worst of human nature now stood as proof that courage, justice, and love could triumph over greed, prejudice, and fear. The silence had been broken, replaced by the symphony of life in all its messy, beautiful glory. Miriam and Eli Graves, the woman with scars and the soldier with ghosts, had found in each other and their community the greatest treasure the frontier could offer: a place to belong, hearts that loved truly, and the knowledge that even forced beginnings could lead to chosen endings. The church bell rang midnight as they reached home, 12 clear notes marking not an ending, but another beginning in a story that would inspire generations of Dust Mercy citizens to come. For in this harsh land where survival itself was victory, they had done more than survive. They had thrived. They had loved. They had transformed a town's curse into its greatest blessing. And that, perhaps, was the most revolutionary act of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and exchange thoughts about this tale. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit the hype button to help more people discover this story. Your support means the world to me.